So welcome to this week's Optimum Health Clinic Facebook Live. And you may have noticed that this is happening on Thursday morning, not Wednesday night. And that's because Facebook was down last night, which was somewhat inconvenient. I was wanting to do the Facebook Live and trying multiple different devices, thinking the problem was my end. Thanks, Facebook, for saying the problems with my connection. Or I went on Twitter and discovered that, the whole of Facebook and Instagram was down. So what I wanted to talk about this week is the power of self-awareness. So what I mean by this is the ability to be aware of and understand our own issues and our own challenges. This is something which we tend to get much better at when we do a significant amount of self-development work, if we do that work well and that work is effective. So the kind of benefit is that when we are self-aware, we can understand our issues and our challenges, which allows us to avoid repeating and making a lot of the mistakes we might make in our life. So for example, if we become aware that we have a strong helper pattern, so our tendency is to always put other people's needs before our own, then if we know that we do that, then we can start to see when we're getting into situations where that pattern is playing out. So we can start to recognize that we are burning out, or we're stretching ourselves, or we're just not feeling emotionally nourished in the ways that we know that we want to and we should do. And that allows us to start to do something to change that pattern. If we don't have self-awareness, then what we tend to find is these kinds of patterns just end up governing our life. So we can spend our whole life trying to feel safe by controlling the outside world, realizing that that's a pattern that we have, not being self-aware about it. And so we're kind of living our life on a completely flawed strategy. Or we can have a pattern of having a very strong inner critic. And whenever anything goes wrong, we tend to judge ourselves and blame ourselves. That when we're going into new environments, new situations, again, our tendency can be to think that people aren't going to like us, or to criticize ourselves, or whatever it may be. If you can see it, you don't have to be it. So the more awareness we have of these sorts of patterns, it's not that necessarily awareness alone is enough to change the pattern, although awareness alone often can be very helpful as a stepping stone towards changing the pattern. But sometimes alone, just becoming aware of the patterns we're doing is enough to start to loosen the grip of that pattern and to start to change things. So to me, it's self-awareness is almost like a kind of secret weapon. It's a way of going out into the world prepared for life, really, prepared for the challenges and the circumstances that we all find ourselves in different ones, but often life is challenging. But if we know our patterns, we know our tendencies, we're self-aware around those, we can make much better decisions. We can avoid kind of potholes and avoid making the same mistakes. And we can also be more gentle, more loving, more supportive of ourselves in those situations, because we can see, well, hang on a second, I'm doing my achiever pattern, or I'm doing my control pattern, or I'm doing my anxiety pattern, whatever it may be. And sometimes, as long as it's done with care, we can almost laugh at ourselves, right? There can be a certain level of self-reflective, compassionate humor, which is, oh yeah, I'm doing my thing again. And it just loosens the grip of that. So what helps us cultivate self-awareness? Well, the first thing is courage. That we need to be brave enough to see things which are sometimes uncomfortable or awkward or inconvenient or painful to see. So it just takes a willingness and an openness to want to understand and want to see. And part of what I think feeds that is when we come to realize that actually living in the truth of what's happening is ultimately easier, is ultimately freer, more satisfying than living in a delusion of what's happening. So there's a certain comfort and a certain nourishment that just comes from seeing things the way that they are. So courage being the first thing. The next thing is having good maps. So we talk in different places. There's content on secrets to recovery, conscious transformation, and maybe it's something we'll do a theme of at some point on these lives, of the Enneagram. And the Enneagram being a model of 9 different personality types. And the Enneagram isn't the only model like this. There's different models that different people use. I like the Enneagram model for a number of reasons, partly because it's relatively simple at a surface level, but it has a great level of depth and nuance if you want to go deeper into it. Another map that I find very helpful is Spiral Dynamics. It's a map of the different stages of values development that we go through in life. And so it helps us understand what we or what others value to be important. Like, what is our kind of driving thing that we're trying to get? Like, is it more important for us to be achieving, doing, successful in the world? Or is it more important for us to be in connection, harmony, and balance with others? Or is it more important for us to be kind of powerful and in control and kind of leading the charge? The difference between the Enneagram and Spiral Dynamics is the Enneagram is a map of 9 different personality types. Tells us nothing about the level of development within that type. Spiral Dynamics is a model of the different stages of development that we all go through. So the Enneagram is kind of a horizontal map. It just tells us different types. Spiral Dynamics tells us development, like how far we've evolved or grown in our values and what we value to be important. Some people find the idea of these kind of maps kind of offensive. They don't like the idea of people being put in boxes, and I understand that. And I think it's much more helpful to think about types within people rather than types of people. I think we all have many different qualities and facets that make us up the way that we are. But these kind of maps can be really helpful in terms of tracking our tendencies, our habits, our behaviors. So courage and having good maps. The next thing is getting good at pattern recognition. Being able to kind of see kind of patterns repeating. And it's interesting when you go looking for things. It's a little bit like if you decide you're going to get a new car, and let's say you decide you're going to get a Ford Escort. And I don't even get Ford Escorts anymore. I just thought of that because I used to have a Ford Escort. But it's like everywhere you go, you start seeing Ford Escorts, for example, or you just discover you're going to have a baby, and you start looking at buggies, and suddenly you start seeing buggies and models and types of buggies everywhere. So we tend to get what we look for. So if we start looking for certain patterns, we tend to get better at identifying and recognizing those patterns. And it's kind of one thing to see a pattern on the big kind of macro level. It's the next step to see those patterns as they play out on a kind of daily, moment-to-moment basis. So be getting good at pattern recognition. And the final piece I have here, obviously there's a lot more to it than just this, but just as a kind of starting point, is getting good feedback from people around us. Now, getting good feedback isn't all that easy, right? Because the tendency when people give us feedback is either there is judgment in the feedback or we project judgment onto the feedback. So it's getting feedback which is not judging us, it's not criticizing us, it's not making us feel small or kind of squashed. But if there are people around us, and sometimes a really skilled therapist is the best person to help do this, but having people that can help us see things in ourselves that are not very easy to see by ourselves. It's a little bit like when you learn to drive, one of the things you discover there's a particular blind spot with the mirrors over one shoulder. So you have to kind of look around and check the blind spot, otherwise you won't see a car that's there. Same is true as in life, that we have parts of ourselves that for various reasons, which we won't go into now, it's really hard to see. And it's almost like somebody to kind of turn your head and help you see that and kind of put a spotlight on it. And then once you see it, it's very hard to unsee it because now you have the clarity around it. So to summarize, self-awareness, I think, is a really, really important quality to develop, because on the recovery path, it'll help you stop repeating unhealthy habits and patterns that are causing crashes or relapse or frustration or whatever. It takes courage. We have to be brave to see things that we're perhaps uncomfortable to see. We need good maps to help us kind of identify that. We need to get good at spotting patterns, like kind of pattern recognition. And we also need to, it's helpful to get feedback from others if we do that in a way which doesn't involve judgment. So I hope that's been helpful. It might be useful in the comments. I'm just using a different format to do the Facebook Live this time. I wanted to experiment with, so I can't actually easily kind of look at the comments right now. But it'd be good in the comments to share what you've noticed yourselves in terms of your own self-awareness and how it's been helpful to recognize your own patterns and kind of what the value of that has been. So I hope that's been useful, and I look forward to talking with you again next week. Bye-bye for now.